Hi everyone, this is Sharon. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than my normal type of video. I am going to do a craft room tour for you. I've had a number of subscribers ask me to do a tour, and so I finally got around to taping one. I realized I couldn't walk and talk and point at the same time, so I'm attempting to do a voiceover. We'll see how this goes. So what I'll do is kind of show you the three main areas in this room. I'll pan through that, and then I'll come back and show you in a little bit more detail how I organize and lay everything out in this room. A little bit of history on the room itself. My husband and I built this home about 20 years ago. Prior to that, we lived in a small little two-story 1920s brick house. It was a cute little house, but it had very little storage and lots of little rooms. And so my first order of business with this house was to plan out this room because I knew I wanted a place where I could do sewing. At the time, I did a lot of sewing, mostly quilts and home decor type things. So I wanted a large area where I could lay out my fabric with lots and lots of storage. And as we start to pan through here, I can kind of show you. The other thing I wanted in this room was a small desk office area where we could put our computer and the printers and some file storage and some room for papers and things. So that's the first area when we come into the room. Then there's a rather large shelf area that is used for books and storage. And then, of course, is the crafting area, which now I do very little fabric sewing, but mostly making journals and paper type crafting. But it does come in handy for those sewing projects as well. And then the third area that I really wanted to incorporate into this room was a laundry room area. Because at the time, again, I did a lot of washing of fabrics and things, and it was just very handy to have that in the same room as well. And the sink, of course, as you know, is very handy also. So then we come all the way back around to where we started, and this room is right off our kitchen. So if we head back into the room, starting on the left-hand side with this office area, we've got quite a bit of storage to the left of the desk area, and that's for personal records and documents and things we keep in there. And then we have our computer with two monitors, which really come in handy when you're working on a project and you want to flip back and forth between files and the internet and things like that. I really like and enjoy the two monitors. Then if we look at the covers over the top of the printers there, on the left-hand side, that's where I have all of my printing paper, copy paper and things like that, and on the right hand side are just general household items. So it's probably the only cupboard, one of the few cupboards in that room that doesn't have craft related stuff. And then I've got two printers. A lot of people ask me about the printers. This one is an HP LaserJet Pro. I really like that printer. I use it for most of my color printing when I'm working with my projects. It's got a good quality output, and that's why I like to use that one. And then I also have next to it an inkjet printer, and that one is a Canon G6020. It's got the large tanks like the Epson EcoTank printers, and I like that one as well. It has a pretty good quality to it. I use it more so for printing in black and white, neutrals, things like that, and it also has a scanner, so I use it for scanning as well. So those are the two printers that I use, and I'm pretty happy with them so far. In the corner, I've got just some small storage boxes and a little container with my 20 pairs of reading glasses that I always seem to lose. And then in the drawers below the printers, I've got on the left-hand side some packaging supplies, and then there's some electronic supplies like cables and things like that in one of those drawers. And then on the right bank of drawers, mostly specialty kinds of papers like vellum, photo paper, labels, and things like that. As we move over into this middle section, we have a tall bookshelf area that separates the office area from the craft area. And on the top shelf, I've got my wallpaper rolls and lots of book blocks of book pages that I like to use in my journals. And then there are also some large atlases on that shelf as well. And then the next shelf down is my favorite shelf. That's where I have my collection of journals from other makers that I really admire. And I pull those out quite often for inspiration and just to look through the pages. I don't really journal in any of them. And then on the next shelf down, I've got more storage for buttons. So I've got 6 drawers from an old Singer sewing machine cabinet. And in each of those, I just stack them up. I've got button storage and some vintage jewelry pieces in there. And then I've got more storage boxes that I got from my sister-in-law that she found in her attic, which I love. There's another one down there. And those I just have some paper ephemera in. And then on top of it, I've just got a stack of ephemera pieces that I use most often, and I just pull those off of there when I need them. In the middle, I've got some journals that I actually do use. These are leather-bound ones, kind of traveler's notebook type journals, and they're more utilitarian. I use them for making lists and notes and things. And then these are very deep shelves, and behind them I've got some of my book collections of things, different books that I have. And then on the left, I've got 3 more of those drawers with buttons in them. The next shelf down, I've got, again, some of my all-time favorite journals from my favorite journal makers. And then I've got this collection of mid-1800s antique French books. These are ones that I don't take apart. I just use them for inspiration. I love these old books with the beautiful covers, and I have scanned some of those. And then on the right, I've got some of the smallest books in my collection that are quite ornate. And then this narrow shelf down, I've got more storage boxes, some tags, some little cards. These are ephemera pieces like playing cards and things like that. On the next shelf, I've got these 4 large cardboard boxes that I covered in fabric. In those, I put a lot of general paper that I use again, like coffee dyed papers, ledger papers, envelopes, tissue paper, cardstock, just all kinds of miscellaneous types of materials that I would use in my journals. And then as we head to the bottom shelf, I've got these 3 bins where I keep all of my paper punches, or most of them. These are the larger ones, so I've kind of got them separated by type in each of those bins. So that is the bookshelf, and now we will head on over into the main craft area. So if we head on over to the upper cupboards first in this area and start rummaging through those, this very first set is a little gift wrapping area that I have set up. My husband retrofitted this area for me, and it works out really well. It's a rollout shelf with some dowels that he put into it. And on the dowels, I can slide on some gift wrapping rolls, and I've got ribbon and gift bags and things, and that does all pull out and roll out, so it's easy to access. And then in the next set of cupboards, I dig in these a lot. This is where I have on the lower shelf all my glues and pastes and things like that. Some adhesive, some of my bookbinding tape. And the next shelf up, I've got string and thread, and that's pretty much it on that shelf. A lot of thread that I acquired. And then the shelf above that is just some miscellaneous equipment items. And then in this last set of cupboards, in the lower shelf, I've got beads and charms and eyelets, bookbinding supplies, some punch boards and things, my scoreboard. And then the next shelf up, I've got all of my acrylic paints, chalk, color pencils, watercolors, some inks. And then the shelf above that is kind of a catch-all for some miscellaneous craft items as well. And that, you see the spirograph there? One of my favorite vintage finds. Okay, and that takes care of the upper cupboards. We'll slowly move our way back to the left and talk about what's on the countertop. So these cubic storage pieces I bought at Michael's probably 10 or 15 years ago, and they've really served me well over the years. There's some open storage and some with drawers in them. And then I keep a lot of the supplies that I use most often there because I stand at my island and I can just turn around right behind me and pull what I need. So on this top shelf here, I've got my Roxy Creations paper bundles and some old postcards. I've got laundry labels, cardstock, some miscellaneous pieces of cardstock, my old tape, and what else have we got in there? Some handmade papers, a treasure box I got from my friend Steph, and a few other items down there, scrapbooking papers. Then in these 6 drawers, it's mostly small tools. So I've got some smaller punches and some jewelry making tools in there. In this drawer in the middle, I've got really small, like circle punches and things like that. And then I've also got some metal pieces in one of the small drawers, doilies and small envelopes. And then in this last section that's open, I have had this supply of old piano boxes for a long time, and I really didn't know what I was going to do with them. But eventually I figured out they make really nice washi tape storage. And so that's what I've done. I just put them in these open shelves and they act like little small drawers, and I can put all my washi tape in there. Now, as we head to this back corner, this is kind of a catch-all. I've got 3 large books there that I use for pressing papers and flowers. I've got 2 dictionaries and a cookbook. And so you can kind of see where I've got papers hanging out in that top one. That's where I've got some flowers pressed in there right now. And I've just got some small reference books in there also that I kind of pull from. Way back in the corner, I've got some thread storage on the wall behind the large sewing machine. That sewing machine is the one I use strictly for fabric. That's one I've had for quite a while. This is a little desk area again where I do all of my sewing. So the fabric one is in the corner, and then I've got my big shot that I used for embossing, that's in the middle. And then on the right hand side is a smaller sewing machine that I have, and that's what I use for all of my paper machine stitching. So that area works out quite well and was the initial purpose of this room. So now if we come back over and look at the lower storage, in these cabinets I've got mostly knitting and crocheting supplies. I used to do a lot of knitting and crocheting. I do a little bit still. And then in this top drawer here I've got all of my ink pads. In this next drawer I've got my small alphabet wood stamps. And then in the next 4 drawers around that sewing machine area, I've got all sewing machine supplies like bobbins and thread and things like that. So I think the next area I go to is under the desks. So as a typical crafter, we make use of every single space in our room. So under there, I really reorganized that recently and bought all kinds of boxes with labels where I can put more supplies, lots of ephemera type things in those boxes. I've got some with just French letters, some with French ephemera, some with US ephemera, lots of photos. I'm trying to remember what else I have in those. Some partially started projects, ephemera pieces that I might have already completed. I put in some of those boxes. I've got some of my sari trims in that bin there. And the thing I love the most about this area is I put all these boxes on these little dollies. They're just like mini dollies, like the ones they would use to repair cars or roll under cars. And I can just roll everything out in big stacks, and I don't have to stack and restack like I used to and curl under there to get to the back, which really works out well. And I also have a little map of what's down below there up on my bulletin board. So I can quickly look at that, see what's in what box, and then go right to the spot where I need to go find what I'm looking for. So that has really organized me quite a bit in my storage area. As long as we're up on the bulletin board, let's just kind of take a look at what's on there. You'll see in the way far left corner, as far away as I can get them from myself or anyone else in this household, I have my fabric scissors and my fabric pinking shears, and I keep them hung up there so I don't use them accidentally on paper. I also retired this past year, so I've got my name plaque up there in case I forget who I am. So I use this as pretty much an inspiration board. I hang cards and little mementos that I get from people, maybe some things that I've just recently completed and I don't have a place for them yet. I'll throw them up there. But I've just got a lot of my favorite things kind of hanging on this inspiration board. One of my all-time favorite things up there is this beautiful old brooch that I bought in Florence in a little antique shop when I was there, probably about 5 years ago or so. Okay, so these two framed pieces are actually Peterson's magazine centerfolds of women's and in their clothing from the 1800s. And I bought these at an antique shop and I never hung them anywhere, so I thought I'd use them as more of a utilitarian type thing. So I covered them with examples of all my paper punches. And I just stuck them up there on top of those frames so I could kind of see what I have and I don't forget, and I can just kind of go take a peek and decide which one I want to use. On the way right side of my bulletin board, I've got my measuring tapes and some rulers. And then I also love to collect measuring devices. So I've got up in the corner, that's a square, an old antique wooden square. And then I've got some old measuring tapes and this is a piece of terracotta that I got when I was in Italy too. I've got those bendy kind of fold in yardstick type wooden ones that are kind of antique or vintage. So I've got some of those old things sitting up there too as just a little bit of fun and nice things to look at. So now we are panning around to the work island. This is the area of the room where I spend all my time, do all my crafting, and also do my filming on there as well. So in this left corner here, I've got a little bit more storage for smaller things in these cigar boxes. I keep all my little snippets of lace and fabric, book spines, my collection of calling cards, things like that in there. I've got more buttons in that jar there. The 3 binders there are ones that I made to hold ephemera. So I've got one for stickers, I've got one for my labels, and I've got one for postage stamps. In the open white cubicle, I've got more resource books that I use for journal pages. And then in the shelves above that, I've got overflow cardstock and envelopes in those. In that box way up on the top on the right, that's a find that I got last year. It's an antique box and I've got lace storage in there. And then in the open cube below that, I've got my supply of scrapbooking papers. I used to have lots more. I got rid of it all and sent it home with my granddaughter. So what I've got left are just some of my favorites, mostly Tim Holtz ones. And then in the 3 drawers, the white drawers below that, I've got most of my stamps that I have, woodblock stamps and clear cling stamps. In the 2 holders in front of those drawers, I've got one where I keep all of my scissors. I've got both straight edge and decorative scissors in the one. I honestly don't know why I keep that many because I tend to pull the same 3 or 4 pairs. But anyway, they're in there. And then in the other cup, I've got all of my paint brushes and ink brushes. As we move over to this area with the large black mat, this is where I really do all of my dry work. So things like paper cutting, paper punching, laying out my signatures and working on spreads. I do that in that general area, and I keep my pages there while I'm working on them. And then on this glass mat on the right hand side, that's where I do all of my wet work. So inking, painting, gluing, those types of things. And then in the area back behind that mat is where I keep my iPad playing at all times. And that's where I like to kind of watch my favorite YouTube channels while I'm crafting away. So that's why I don't do a lot of craft with me's and tutorials, because I've always got other things playing in the background. So we recently replaced the countertops in this entire room and on the island from Formica to butcher block. And so far I'm loving it. It's a nice warm feel. Time will tell if it was a smart decision or not. I tend to put down a lot of mats while I'm working so I don't get things like ink and paint on there. So we'll see how that goes as time goes on. One thing I wanted to mention related to how I do my filming, under this black mat, I've got a couple other large cutting mats that I used to use for sewing, but now I've got them covered on both sides with these adhesive wallpaper patterns, and I use those as backdrops for my work surface when I'm filming. It just puts a little bit more of an interesting but fairly neutral plain background underneath my work. And then I use this device for filming. I really love it. It's a ring light by Canvas. It's got a nice place for me to put my phone in the top when I film, and you can move it into just about any position you like while you're filming. It moves back, swivels back and forth, up and down, pretty much every direction, and then it folds up really nicely when you're done, and I can just push it out of the way when I don't need it. So just to finish up the island on this side, on the lower 4 cupboards, those are filled with fabric storage. And then in the drawers along the top side, in this first one, I've got my embossing folders. Keep those in there. And then the next one over, I've got all the little supplies that I use most often. So things like my rusty paper clips, some brads, pins, and a few of my favorite stamps in the back. And in this last cupboard, I have a bunch of stamps that I never use, and I have since moved those out and put all my ink pads in that drawer. I don't know why I didn't have my ink pads in there because I'm always pulling for those. So that's what I've got in there now. I swapped those 2 drawers. So that's it for that side of the island. I prefer to stand when I craft. I just find it's better on my back than sitting. So I really stand at that island for hours at a time during the day, crafting away. When we had the countertops replaced, I asked them to extend the end of the island a little bit so that if I wanted to pull up a stool and sit, I could, or if my granddaughters are over and they want to come and craft with me, they can do that. But I myself rarely do that. I find that if I need a break and want to sit down, I come back over to the office area where there is a comfortable chair, and I'll just sit and watch videos and do either some slow stitching or fussy cutting or something over there that I can do while I'm sitting. So that's pretty much it for my crafting corner. If we move around the island, you can see there's a little boot bench on the end. I just stuck that there because I don't have any other place to put it. It's a nice place to sit and put shoes on. It has a couple of storage drawers, so that's nice as well. Moving around to the other side of the island, in the lower cupboard, I've got my supply of vintage and antique doilies and embroidery pieces. And then in the drawer above that, I've got all of my laces, which I wind on cards and then just store them in some storage boxes. And then the ones that are smaller and get cut off, the smaller snippets, I just throw in some boxes toward the front of the drawer. And then in this middle drawer, I've got some of my smaller fabric pieces, fabric bundles that I've purchased. They're mostly Italian and French fabrics that I keep in there. In that far drawer, I've got more gift wrapping supplies like bows and ribbons and things like that, small boxes. And then across the bottom in those 2, I've got more fabric storage. And that's pretty much it for the storage. I just briefly panned across the top of my cupboards. I thought, well, I'll just talk a little bit about what I've got up there. Some of my favorite things to take a look at while I'm in here. So I've got my 2 ladies up in the corner. Those are old vintage style, like mannequins for sewing. I've got some antique quilt pieces that I put in that large frame in the back. I've got some vintage cookbooks. My old paper cutter that a lot of you have seen that I posted, I think, on Instagram that I found this past year. I've got an old pillbox hat, and old ties and a fur collar. Then I've got this photo on canvas of Paris that I love that I've got hanging up there, some ceramic pieces. I've got 2 old trunks or suitcases up on there that I use for storage. And then these drawers way up on the upper left side. I used to have those on the island, but it just got too cluttered, so I put them up there. I mostly have ribbons in those. And then way in the upper left, I've got this old sewing machine. We actually bought it for the cabinet, and I couldn't bring myself to throw out the machine inside. It's kind of a neat old one, so I just put it up on top of my cabinets since it is a sewing room. And that is pretty much it. This side of the room, as I said earlier, is the laundry area. Not really much to talk about there, except I really do love, love, love having a sink in here. That is a really nice convenience. So that is it for the tour of my room. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I really enjoy it when I see other people's workspaces, how they work, and how they store things and organize. So hopefully you got something out of that as well. And I just wanted to say one last note. It does not look this clean, at least 95% of the time. I like to clean up in between my projects and put everything away. And that usually lasts for maybe a couple of hours, up to a day if I don't feel like messing it up again right away. But usually all my horizontal surfaces are just covered in paper and lace and fabric. But that's what we love about our space, I guess. So thank you very much for joining me today. And until next time, bye-bye.